Hello everyone! In this lesson, we will work on the search overlay results for the professor and event post types. Let me show you what I mean. So if someone searches for something, in our previous lesson we set up results for general info, programs, and campuses. And now in this lesson we're going to output results for professors and events. Let's start with professors. I don't want to just output simple text like we're doing for these other post types. For professors, I want to output a small image or photograph of the professor, and then I want to overlay their name on top of the image. Now we've already done this. If we close the overlay and go to the programs page, and then if I click onto my biology program, in this section you can see that we've already created that exact styling and that exact feature. Right? We have a photo for each professor with their name overlaid. So I just want to use this HTML and CSS structure in our search overlay for any professor results. So without further ado, let's make this happen. The first step is over in our text editor. Within our JavaScript modules folder, let's hop into search.js. And then let's scroll down to our method that is named getResults. Here it is. And here we see the heading level 2 for professors. Now, in order to save some typing, we can recycle the 3 lines right above it. These 3 lines will help us loop through the results. So I'm just going to copy this into my clipboard and then right below the professor's headline, paste it in. Okay, now within our new code, we don't want to look for a subarray named programs. Instead, we want professors. So let's change this. And do the same thing for these 2 lines as well. Programs to professors. All right, and then on this first line, when we are creating the opening unordered list tag, these CSS classes make sense if we want to output a plain text list. But remember, for professors, I want to output a photograph for each professor. So let's delete this class of minList and linked-list. And instead, let's give it a class of professor-cards. All right, then if we scroll over a little bit to the right, this is the message that will display if there are no resulting professors. So let's change this from programs to professors. And if there are no professors, we don't want to display a link anywhere like we did for programs, right? Because we don't have an all professors page. So I'm just going to delete this A tag entirely. All right. Now next, let's customize this line. This is the line where we actually spell out the HTML that we want for each result item or for each professor post. Now in this case, I'm going to delete all of this. I want a clean slate. So let's just completely hollow out this template literal. Right after the backtick, so right at the beginning of the opening LI tag, and I'm just going to select all the way to the closing LI tag and delete. All right, so now we've got an empty pair of backticks, and in between them, I'm actually going to drop down to a new line so I can stay organized. All right, now the question becomes, what HTML do I want to output in order to generate this styling and this structure? Well, there's no sense in reinventing the wheel, so why don't we just find this PHP template, and then we can literally just copy and paste the HTML that generates this styling into our JavaScript. So the page that I'm viewing at the moment is single-program. That's what's allowing me to see this section. So over in our text editor, let's just jump into single-program.php. And if we scroll down a bit, underneath this first WP query that we see, here we see the opening unordered list with a class of professor cards. And then most importantly, here is the list item that's getting generated for each professor. So this is what has the photo for each professor and the overlay text. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to select this entire list item. So from the opening LI to the closing LI tag, let's copy that into my clipboard. And then back in our search.js file, in this space where we just hollowed out the template literal, let's just paste in our clipboard. And now we just need to go through, and anywhere we see PHP, we need to get rid of it and replace it with a JavaScript expression instead. So for example, the first bit of PHP we see is right here for the href value. So let's delete this entire PHP block that is outputting the permalink. And in its place, let's use a JavaScript expression, so $ curly brackets. And then we can just say item.permalink. We can use permalink because remember back in Postman, here I've sent an example request to our custom API URL. And remember that our JSON results will contain a property named permalink. All right, now back in our code, the next bit of PHP we see is on this image line. So we see that for the source attribute of the image, we were using PHP to give us a URL of this featured image at a very specific size and crop. Now before we go ahead and delete this block of PHP, if we jump over to Postman, it's clear to see that our JSON does not contain a property with a URL that points towards a thumbnail image. So what we need to do right now is modify our JSON output to include a property, and we could name it whatever we want, maybe image, and it should contain a URL to a JPEG. So to do that, back in our text editor, in our theme folder, let's look inside our INC folder and jump into searchroute.php. And let's scroll down until we see the if block for the professor post type. So if get post type equals professor. And within this associative array that we are building, let's just add on a new property. So maybe at the end of this permalink line, we could say comma. And on the new line, we could make up whatever property name we want. I'm going to call it image. And then let's just set it to equal the results of a WordPress function named get the post thumbnail URL. Now we want to pass this WordPress function two things. The first is which post you want to get the thumbnail image for. You can just say 0, which is WordPress code for saying the current post. And then the second argument is the size that you want to use. So remember, way back in the course, we learned how to create different cropped versions of images. Maybe one is portrait and another is landscape. So to refresh our memory of which size we want, if we jump back into our JavaScript, you can see that we are looking for the size named Professor Landscape. So back in our search route PHP, instead of size, let's say Professor Landscape. Okay, now if I save this and refresh Postman, perfect. We've now got a property named image with an absolute URL to a perfectly cropped JPEG. So now we can go ahead and use this property in our front-end JavaScript. So back in search.js, right after the source attribute equals quotes, let's delete this entire PHP block. And in its place, use a JavaScript expression, and let's say item.image. Okay, and then finally, we want to update the actual name of the professor or the title of the post. That's being output in this span here. So let's delete this block of PHP and then create an expression and just say item.title. Okay, now if we save this and make sure that your JavaScript is getting compiled and bundled up, and if we jump over to the front end, and if I search for barks a lot, I know that should have a professor result. Cool, there we have it. And if I try to open that in a new tab, you can see that it successfully takes us to that professor. Or better yet, if I searched for lorem, as in lorem ipsum, that should give us multiple results. Cool, this looks pretty nice. At this point, let's change gears and let's work on outputting results for the event post type. So back in our JavaScript, let's find the heading level 2 that reads events. Here it is. So right below this, we just want to loop through any resulting posts. To avoid a bit of extra typing, we can recycle these lines up here. In this case, we actually do not need the bottom line. We can just grab and copy these two lines. So let me scroll all the way over to the right to get the end of that line. Go ahead and copy it. And then back underneath the events headline, let's paste that in. Now, events are a little bit different because they don't need an opening unordered list tag. Now, this is a tiny random detail that has nothing to do with WordPress or JavaScript in general. This just has to do with the way that I coded the event styling in the first place. So to refresh your memory of what we're trying to do here, back on our home page, I want to use this custom format and styling for the events in our search overlay, instead of just plain text like we're using for general info or programs. So visually, this is our goal. So back in our JavaScript, first of all, the subarray that we are looking for within results should no longer be campuses. This should be events. Let's update this as well. Okay, and now if the array has a length greater than 0, if that's true, we do not need to output this unordered list tag. So instead, let's just output a completely blank pair of quotes. But if the array is empty, we still want a bit of text that says nothing matches that search. So let's just change this to say no events match that search. And then we can link them to the all events page. So let's change this href to be /events instead of campuses. And change this to say view all events. Cool. Now next up, we need to customize this line that generates the HTML for each item. I just want a clean slate, so I'm just going to completely delete this list item from beginning to end. Okay, so now we've just got a blank template literal, and within that, I'm going to drop down just to stay organized. And now the question is, what HTML do we want to generate? Well, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. We can just find the HTML that generates this format and copy and paste it. So I know that the HTML template to generate an event like this lives within a very specific file. Within our theme folder, earlier in the course, we created a subfolder named template parts. And if we look inside it, we have a file named content-event. And this is the HTML that gives us this formatting. So we can literally just copy all of this, select all copy, and then back in our JavaScript, within our blank template literal, paste it in. And now we just need to hollow out any of the PHP and replace it with JavaScript expressions. Actually, the first thing I'm noticing is that on this opening A tag, the href value is just a hashtag. So let's get rid of that, and in its place create an expression and just say item.permalink. Okay, the next thing we need to work on is outputting the 3-letter month abbreviation and the date. So back in our code, here's a block of PHP that is getting the date field and then echoing out the month, and then down here we are echoing out the day. Now if we look at Postman, and if I search for something that should return an event, like poetry for Poetry Day, we clearly do not have properties that will give us the month and day. So we need to go add those right now. So back in our code, within our INC folder, let's jump into search route. And if we scroll down a bit, here's the if block, if the post type is event. And let's just add on to this associative array. So at the end of this permalink line, we can add a comma and then drop down. And let's create a property named month. For now, we can just set it to equal x as a placeholder. And let's also say day and set that to be x. Okay, and now we just need to actually get the month and day values. Again, we do not need to reinvent the wheel and write new code. We can just go back into our search JavaScript, and we've already got the PHP code here that will fetch the overall event field and then generate the month and the day. So here's what I'm going to do. This line of code that says event date equals new instance of date time, let me just copy that entire line, and then over in our search route PHP file, right above this array push line, so right underneath this if line, we can just paste in our clipboard. All right, so now we've got this variable named event date, and now down here for month and day, we can just look inside of event date instead of these placeholder x values. For an example of how to do that, back in our JavaScript, you can see that we were echoing the month by just looking inside event date. Dash greater than is how you look within an object in PHP. And then we were using the format method, and capital M is the code for a 3-letter month abbreviation. So we can actually just copy and paste this block of code here. We don't need the echo, we just want this. Copy that. Back in our search route, for month, get rid of the placeholder, say this. And then for day, we can do the same thing, paste it in. And the code for day is lowercase d. Cool, now if we save this and refresh Postman, Perfect. Within our JSON, we now have a month property and a day property. So now, back in our front-end JavaScript, we are free to completely delete all of this PHP here. So the PHP block begins here and ends here. And in its place, within this span, we just want to output the month. So JavaScript expression, and then item.month. Now let's do the same thing for the day. So the PHP block begins here and ends here. Let's open up a JavaScript expression and say item.day. All right, next up, we see PHP being used to output the permalink. So let's delete that. PHP starts here and ends here. JavaScript item.permalink. And then inside the A tag, we are using PHP to output the title. So let's delete that chunk of PHP. Item.title. Okay, and then finally, we are using PHP to generate a brief description or excerpt. Right? On our home page, you can see that if an event has a custom excerpt, we display that. But if it doesn't have a handcrafted excerpt, then as a fallback, we just display the first 20 or 30 words of the post. So back in our code, we can literally just copy and paste this if logic out of this JavaScript template and into our search route PHP. Let me show you what I mean. So let's begin selecting at the start of the if statement, and then the if-else combo ends right here. So let's copy that into our clipboard. And then over in our search route.php file, within this array that we are building, after this day line, let's add a comma. And let's create a brand new property. We could name it whatever we want. I'm going to call it description. And let's set it to equal. And now this is the part that's a little bit tricky. I'm not just going to paste in my clipboard here, because that could get quite messy. Instead, let's do this. Up above this array push line, let's create a new variable and name it description. And let's set it to equal null. So now we've got this empty placeholder variable. And now right below that, we can paste in our clipboard. And now we can just adapt and clean up this if-else statement. So I don't need all of this extra space. Okay, now we don't actually want to echo anything. Instead, we just want to update the value of our description variable. So if this is the case and this code runs, let's get rid of the echo and just say description equals this. Else, if this is the case, get rid of the echo, say description equals this. Cool, so now down here within this array that we are building, let's just say this property equals our description variable. Okay, so if we save that and then refresh Postman, beautiful. We can see we've got a new property named description. So now back in our front-end JavaScript code, we can go ahead and delete this entire PHP block that was surrounding the if-else logic. And in its place, use an expression and say item.description. Okay, and then finally, let's not forget about the read more link. So let's get rid of this PHP, replace it with a permalink. Item.permalink. Cool. Now if we go ahead and save that, and then back in the browser, if I search for poetry, as in poetry day, there should be a result. Yep, looks perfect. Or if I search for science of cats, I know that's another event that I have. Perfect. And you can click the link, and it takes you to that event. And that's going to bring this lesson to a close. In our next lesson, we will work on the main reason why we created a custom API URL in the first place. What I'm referring to is implementing custom search logic so that when you search for biology, it should pull in any professors that have a relationship to the biology program. And it should also pull in any campuses or events that are related to biology. Setting up that logic should be a lot of fun, so let's keep things rolling, and I will see you in the next lesson.